Thank you for that. Very excited to be here today with a legend in the sim space, Nate, my homeboy here with me. So he'll introduce himself in a moment. Atif Ghauri, I am the president and COO for UltraViolet, and I know I'm on a webinar around sim migrations and more technical stuff. Been around this space for past decade, particularly around sim, around different solutions, and then most recently now with AI SIEM and SentinelOne and some large integration projects we've been doing. So very excited to share some of the lessons learned, best practices, tips from that here with you today. And I will pass over to Nate to do an intro as well. And he really is a legend, Nate. Don't be humble.
Thank you. My name is Nate Smalley. I'm one of the principal architects here at SentinelOne, where we focus on obviously cybersecurity. And in this one, we're going to lean a little bit on my experience in building technologies and ensuring that our customers are successful. So a lot of this is in and around how to help teams, customers, your organizations be prepared should you be contemplating or investigating solutions and what we've seen with other customers that might help you with those lessons learned. So Atif, please go ahead.
Yeah, and one thing I want to point about Nate as well is that he comes from a very strong background in one of the premier SIMs in the past, not so much anymore, Splunk, and understanding how that was built, how that was deployed, and we'll cover that as part of our story here. So with that, let's jump into the agenda, and I'm going to make sure this works. There we go, it's moving. So the agenda here is, let's start off a classic problem definition so that we are setting the stage right around this legacy SIEM challenge, going into, okay, so what's driving the change? And then particularly, you're considering going to another SIEM, particularly something like AI SIEM, autonomous SOC. What are the key things we see with doing that type of project, and what are some of the things that we learned along the way? We'll give some real world lessons from particular examples, which we'll go into, and then talk about what's next and how to go from here moving forward. So that's the agenda for today. So with that, we'll jump right into the first part of this about the challenge, right? So many of the folks on this webinar are coming from different sources. From I understand from the invite list, we have folks that are architects, managers, SIM experts, and I think you'll all agree with me that the data lakes are here, right? And the data lakes are in the space are often confusing things around what you do with a data lake versus a SIM, how you apply it for cybersecurity use cases versus IT use cases versus overall data analytics use cases, right? That comes into play. Pricing, right? The how you license the model. It's almost impossible to get the right price for the long term, right? You may start off with one ingest level or one level of use, and then start paying penalties as you continue to deploy your instance. So that's a driver today. And what we're seeing is around the data, right? There's the use cases that we need to develop to actually make the data that we're collecting and analyzing valuable. But also, what about the app data, right? I think historically, I've been in the space now for past 10 years exclusively as a managed service provider in that role. We're talking about infrastructure data. We're talking about Active Directory, EDR data, network data, firewall data, but even cloud data. But what about where the juicy stuff is in the applications, right? The authentication related to a misuse RBAC rule or a escalation of privileges within role-based access control, right? That type of data is also a challenge because who knows how the applications are written, right? It may be still in Ruby and Rails, or it might be something more modern like with Golang and something else, right? So it's something that is a challenge today, and the solutions out now are starting to address this. And with that, I'm going to pass to Nate to talk about the solution that we are centered around.
Thanks so much. I think it's super important if we look at those four characteristics that really define a legacy SIM, right? The first one is and how we maybe do that a little bit differently. When we think about that data that Atif was mentioning, right? that data has come from a variety of sources for the last 25, 30 years that SIEM has been around. Not to date myself, but that it pretty much is the same data. And Atif, you tell me, it's about the same data that we started out when we started. Not much has changed. The difference is the volume and the way that we interact with that data. So obviously, if you haven't heard, SentinelOne purchased a organization called Observo, and that really is to address a lot of the legacy SIEM getting data in. Concerns that we've seen and heard, right? Data pipelines is absolutely a thing. And now to Atif's point about not having to have the known configurations and be able to do all that parsing, but put it on a pipeline, allow you to interrogate your data or leverage, technologies to just automatically sort that data and put it into a normal format that would be useful. Specifically at SentinelOne, we use OCSF, which is basically an open cybersecurity framework that allows for us to understand the actionability of each one of these sources. Once that goes into Observo, now you have this wealth of capabilities, right? From doing your investigations like your threat hunters would want, right? To go in and leverage our purple assistant to come in and ask those natural questions, to go in and really sort into what are those behaviors that you're concerned about. And then to your analysts or to your responders, right? To have all of that data in one place with the dashboards, the descriptions, the understanding of a summarization of what those incidents and alarms are really telling you, right? Because nobody understands what mimikatz.exe does, but you could definitely understand Mimikatz if you know that based on the summary that Purple gives you is a malicious material and that it is doing lateral movement, right? And doing ransomware type behaviors. So those are the things that you can automatically see in AI SIEM. And that's because we're leveraging the customer experience or your experience, either from that operator or from that threat hunter, right? To really see that from a SIEM. But it doesn't really stop there, right? When we think about CNAP or we think about our EDR, right? With all of those in one platform, that makes it very easy for your teams to pivot from one place to another place, making those decisions and then taking full advantage of hyperautomation and our SOAR or our orchestration, automation, and remediation technology, right? To go in and interact with Okta to disable that user, or go into Cloudflare and go ahead and add a firewall rule to your WAF. Those are the capabilities that really set this apart. No longer is a SIEM just an event management and collection system, but it's a actionability system that your teams can now leverage to really go to that next distance and solve those security and business relevant problems. So sorry for the long diatribe there, but hopefully that kind of sets the stage, Atif.
No, Nate, and one follow-up question for you. I mean, you're one of the principals, top engineers at SentinelOne. I mean, hearing about the acquisition, I'm sure you had your hands in that with Observo. Like, what's actually most exciting to you about it with the data pipelines? Like, what type of sources, or how do you think that customers would really benefit the most with this capability now in hand?
I'll stay high level, but I'm going to dive in just a little bit. I think things that traditionally have been really hard, like syslog, right? That's a really hard problem to solve. Things like our capabilities with pipelines now makes that kind of go away. We can immediately provide protection. No longer does this have to be a UDP 514 kind of situation, right? But inside of your network, you can push all of those to one location. And then with this pipeline technology, we can install that capability and then encrypt all of that data as it goes from those on-premise or to those cloud assets into SentinelOne. So by default, just another layer of protection, but also the simplicity of deployments that obviously we've struggled from and we're going to get into as far as what we've seen from other customers as they've deployed.
Yeah, I hear you, and we'll pivot here for a moment. But for the folks that are just learning, so UV Cyber has been on SentinelOne really for 2 years now. We were one of the first folks that run SentinelOne as part of our business, and what it is at a high level. from a technical standpoint is, and what makes a difference is it overcomes some of the challenges of because of its challenges SIMs traditionally have faced. I've been around since RSA Archer, right, or RSA when RSA first introduced its SIM, and what it offers really is a schema-free, no-index columnar architecture that leverages parallel execution. And so what that does is it keeps all the telemetry always hot, right? So you get, instead of waiting for the Splunk query to run or the indexer to happen, it's enabling detections real time, right? And so what we're seeing in our SOC is that's leading to faster hunts and more responsive dashboards without delays. And so, as you look tick for tack with different SIMs and what they do or they don't, I think that's one thing to really focus on with SentinelOne of what they center around. So with that, let's keep moving. I wanted to go to the next point around what we're seeing with particular customers. So I mentioned real world examples for real customers that we've been doing work with. We're going to showcase the lessons learned from many of these in today's conversation. One is a big retailer that we're going to talk about where they have had what seems like rise of costs with Splunk, and not just on the cybersecurity side, but also overall on the IT ops side and the business ops side. Then a fintech, which could apply to use cases across the board, not just with this fintech, on how they're looking at log analytics and how quickly are they processing the logs that are being ingested. So that you'll see some of those come into play. Even in the beauty and cosmetics, right? In that space, we have a customer there that we're in the process with the migration on. And, this type of customer says, hey, we make beauty products, right? We're not in the cybersecurity business. So we need a core competency. Our core competency is elsewhere. So we need an autonomous SOC. We need something that all of it is included in one platform, one solution. And so we'll glean on some of those lessons learned as well as part of our discussion here today. All right, so moving along, I think, before we get into some specifics around how the project works, what are the key stages of the projects, and then, of course, the lessons learned within each of the stages, which we'll comment on, what's the timeline? And you see, written in front of you, 1 year. Sure, large deployments, particularly some of the ones we just mentioned, you may think it's 3 to 6 months, which oftentimes it is. But what happens is after that 3 to 6 month window, all the value that's created leads to, I want this log source too, and I need this dashboard too. And that implementation, that migration continues, right? Much longer. So it's almost like the success of the project leads to even more depth and length to how we're going to continue to derive value. We've seen projects that migrate much, much faster. But as far as transforming an organization, an enterprise level organization that is using a SIM type of platform in multiple ways across multiple departments, there's processes involved, right? And there's multiple stakeholders involved, and that's what needs to be planned out carefully. And from your perspective, Nate, like you've been involved with these as well. What other considerations that you want to call out here that we have listed up?
I think there's a couple few when we think about migration. Obviously, every organization I've ran a SOC, I've ran a NOC, back in my former life, and the biggest thing that I was always concerned with when we had to do massive migrations of either a SIM or one of our largest technologies, because SIMs are generally one of those required technologies for large enterprise companies. The first point is to help your teams understand that not everything is going to be the same, and that this is an opportunity to create or improve your approach. So I think that's the one message that we go in is like, when we do think about Splunk, or we do think about QRadar, or we do think of any of those that are kind of in that mix of legacy SIMs now, what you're going to see is that there was problems, there was issues that you had to mitigate through either process or people. And now with that capability that Atif mentioned, that we're so good at, with us being a SaaS where we can spin up, the right amount of CPU to crush any search that an organization has, and do that quickly, that changes the game about things like how to deal with accelerated data models. That's not needed anymore. or how to measure things, because now you can just measure things. You don't have to go and transform data 3 or 4 times. Also, your definition of an alert is going to change. And the reason for it is because all of these alerts do not take 3 to 5 minutes. They take 3 to 5 seconds. So when we think about that being a variable, that's such a different approach when we're setting up that behavior, is because there are some things that maybe are blind spotted or that we just can't see as an organization when we're trying to do this, because we've had to deal with it. And so I think that's the big thing that I don't see here, is like that encouragement of improvement and looking at this as an option or an opportunity to improve. And what are those things that need to be done to improve your security posture, your risk posture, and how do you better partner with the business to identify those, because we're quite capable of that. And once you have those, let us come in and help you really quantify those and qualify those, and then we can kind of build them out. Hopefully that helps and kind of addresses a couple of those few things that might be not here that folks should consider.
Thanks, Nate. And we love it. Questions are coming in. Thank you for those who are posting them. Of course, the materials will be available afterwards, so you could have them. And then secondly, the onboarding a vigilance customer, we'll cover that here in just a few moments. As we get into the project stages, we'll highlight that on what does it mean for an existing vigilance type of a customer. All right, so moving along here, the so what, right? So we're doing this. We understand the pain points that this legacy SIEMs have. We look at what type of outcomes we could deliver, but what's the so what, right? Why are we doing this migration to begin with? What is the impact? This really is an important factor to justify the project to begin with. Anytime you're doing a major initiative, a major data transformation initiative, you got to have some compelling reasons. What we see most often from our customer base, as you see here, the compliance plays, the cost control. Hey, I'll cut your Splunk bill by a fifth, right? Okay, but then what, right? So that what is that outcome for our business? Is it just cost savings? Is it more adaptation to more real-time type of dashboards? Like, for example, with one of the customers that we work with, we realized that, hey, let's take all these existing panels and boards and move them into a AI SIEM model. But along the way, I didn't know that we could see that in real time. I thought I had to wait for that query to run. We could do it real time. And so there's things that come up along the visualization of the data that we're bringing in that become an important outcome to support the business context of the case. So, the lesson learned here that we wanted to share was that it's important to define what we're trying to solve with the migration. Otherwise, you may have a successful migration, the tech is moved, the dashboards are integrated, the data is coming in, but the value has not been defined, right? And you may see it as a successful or unsuccessful project because the business context was not solved. Maybe all the security use cases were moved over, but we still have a gap into the calculations of a customer success metric related to latency on a response time, right? For let's call it the manufacturing business that used it to drive their use case. So all we're calling to action here is it's more than just the bells and the whistles. It's more about what business problem we're trying to solve. And we do want to point that out as something to hit up front as we define the projects. All right, let's get into some of the...
This is one of those... Do you mind if I pause you just for a second? I think
Please.
This is... out of anything, I think this one and the partnership of the security teams along with those business partners that really they rely on them is such a key component to this. When we think about all of the, and I think this Venn diagram does a great job, whether it be compliance or cost control or adaptation, all of our organizations are spending more and more time in the cloud. And so that complexity of new clouds or multi-cloud obviously provides such a wonderful thing for our senior leaders, because this provides visibility for them. It understands from a licensing perspective what they're doing, the cost amounts, all of those also are tucked into this. So those senior executives not only are seeing the risk components, but also by nature, we get so much of what is happening in the environment because security touches everything. And so absolutely a word of advice or just encouragement for the teams here are to leverage this really as a good exercise if you're thinking about this, because it can really garner you some of those strong champions. And if you start with what are your goals, you can start measuring them from the start. And that's such a tremendous activity when we've done these large engagements with some of those teams that we want to make sure have a really strong understanding of where they were and where they are now. So absolutely, this is one of those key components to it. Sorry to interrupt, but I thought it was just a good double tap.
Awesome. That's why we're working together on this thing. I'm glad you brought that up. And jumping in, you got to have a visual of a flow diagram when you're doing a migration presentation, right, Nate? So here it is. Right. So what are the
Always
steps
good
along
flow.
the way? Yeah. And so inside migration, what were we did multiple projects that we're going to refer to here, but now we'll start to get into some of the specifics and come back to that question that came up earlier around onboarding and particularly with the particular platform. We'll get into that. And also, sneak peek, we'll be sharing some of the tools and techniques that we're using in the field, and Nate can talk a little bit about some of the gadgets that he's building for the team to help with different phases of these projects. So starting with planning, parsing, dual shipping, just taking to the flow here, content migration, which is the guts and bolts sometimes, or nuts and bolts of how we go about
both of those. It's guts too.
Yeah, and on that, I hit it right now too. What we find is that we start off saying, "Oh yeah, we want to migrate all this," and then as the customer starts to really look through what they had, it's like, I don't really need this stuff anymore. Like, why do we even have this thing? Oh, and in fact, we want to do this other thing instead. And that's okay, right? Because that's part of the value of going to a more modern architecture and data fabric, the way AI SIEM is positioned today. And then, of course, validation cutover is the final phase that we'll talk about. But this is kind of the flow of how we'll take the conversation next. And we'll start here with the planning and the scoping piece. So planning and scoping, right? So what we learned around these projects that we've worked through is you got to figure out the log collection strategy. And Nate, I'll ask you to talk about that in a moment. Log collection strategy. And then, all your data is lovely, and all your charts, dashboards, and panels are super important. But which ones are the most important? Which ones are mission critical? Wow. Which one's frequency, if it goes off by an hour or by a minute, by a second, matters and has a business impact, right? And then let's use that to prioritize. But log collections is a big one, Nate. Tell us, some of the approach that you have on that based off some lessons learned.
Absolutely. So when we think about log collection, the first and easiest way is to understand what your existing collection looks like. And so one of the things that we recognized was there's a number of different technologies out there that have the capability via REST to provide that detailing. So as you go through with UV Cyber, who's one of our premier partners, they do a lot of work with us, whether it be in the MDR space, right, where they're taking care of our customers, or they're doing through their own services, right? Or they're operating and managing customers for us, where they're doing professional service for us. So I know that was a question as to what our relationship is from a SentinelOne to UV Cyber, but I want to make sure that you understand that, because when you're talking basically with me or Atif, you're talking to both of us just because of how integrated our teams are. So when we think about these engagements, our teams work jointly together to, one, leverage things like Chrome apps that basically allow for you to log in to your Splunk via API, and then pull down all of your dashboards, all of your searches, all of your entities, right? Same thing for QRadar, because we want to make sure that you understand what your environment looks like when we're starting. The second part is that we work through kind of a data discovery with you to make sure that we have it appropriately understood what those sources are and what you want out of them, right? Those searches, those alerts, right? What incident management looks like for you, where it needs to go. And so a lot of log collection is so much more than just log collection. It really is trying to understand your organization and make sure that we can provide you with exactly what you want as an outcome. And so now you understand why outcome had to come first, is because that sets the tone for all of this collection. And it's not just log collection, but it's how do you want that done over time? Is that going to be something that you push through to send to both us as well as your legacy system for a period of time? Or is that something that we need to be considered, we need to adjust technologies for? So there's a number of those questions, and we have a prescriptive approach to this, which is a combination of technology, like I mentioned, with Chrome extensions that are very easy, that provide those reports for you and for our organizations to work together. And then secondarily, some very easy spreadsheets that we can all share together to make sure we have it on lock exactly what you want as outcomes. So after that, we kind of go into that parsing and kind of getting into the nuts and bolts of the work. And Atif's team is one of the best at doing this. I think I spend more time with them than I might spend with my own team, if I'm honest. So I think we can get into parsing and dual shipping.
Yeah. No, and the parsing and dual shipping is one of the things here, like you talked about on the slide here. You'll see dual feed options during migrations. Why do that? Well, that way, particularly with a high availability context with with our retail customer, for example, every minute lost matters for them from business and P&L side. So having logs flow in the right way, and then having dual source of those logs is really important for business continuity. And you wouldn't think about that. You would think, okay, we'll just cut them over. Sometimes you can't just cut over, right? And that's part of one of the lessons learned from one of the engagements. Now, a bunch of questions coming in, and effectively that's why we're here, right? Is to really get you guys engaged and take your questions. So let's answer some of them. I'll start off with one question that came up, which we should have probably mentioned earlier. What's UltraViolet and SentinelOne? What's our relationship, right? Okay, so we're both purple, right? So I know it's confusing. But UltraViolet is a tech-enabled managed service provider, right? And our focus is on services. And a part of our business is on SentinelOne. We chose SentinelOne as our platform of choice. So when you see UltraViolet Lens on our website, like as you pointed out in your question, that's actually powered by SentinelOne, right? SentinelOne is driving that for us. Some of our customers just want an outcome, and they're not looking to manage a SIEM or be part, even purchase a SIEM. They'll just buy UltraViolet Lens, and that by de facto is SentinelOne's AI SIEM, which we use behind the covers. So that's a little bit about ourselves and how we relate to SentinelOne. And I'm going to give all the hard questions to Nate. Like the question here, Nate, that came up around how we adopt to how we integrate with SharePoint and OneDrive. I want to say that there's a marketplace collector for that, but I'll let you take that answer.
Yeah, so it really depends on what you're doing there. But we could absolutely take in a number of those. I think depending on how you're using SharePoint and OneDrive, typically we take the activity logs out of Azure or out of M365 or Entra ID, depending on which one of those three you would want. And then we investigate the activities that occur on SharePoint and on OneDrive. And we make sure that individuals or activities there aren't malicious in nature. So that's the first one. The second one is I know that there's sometimes the idea or the desire to go and scan drives like that. We can do some custom work like that. It just depends on the nuts and bolts of what you'd like. So if you have a little bit more information about that one, I'm happy to talk about it offline. But we do that pretty simply. And you were absolutely right, Atif. It's one of those marketplace apps that we just turn on for Azure, and we would start getting the activity logs from everything that's happening in those shared services.
And Nate, while we're on the technical points around the platform as a service solutions, there was a question around, is there a framework to evaluate the logs to import for the pass for a pass solution?
And yes, so that's one of those when we're a big MITRE attack framework, so we leverage that a lot. So when we think about your risk profile or those risk landscapes that you have, absolutely. Your cloud environments are going to be those that we care about the most, at least, just simply because they're the places changes happen most often in our experience. And so if we can, that's one of those that's key for us to go after. Did that answer the question, Atif?
I think so. And if not, just ask a follow-up question and we'll
ask more.
And I'll take a couple here. I'll take a couple of the softballs here, Nate. I'll gladly do them. Is this log stored in the cloud? Yes. And then also, if there's any predicting a question, if you have some level of compliance requirements like FedRAMP or GDPR or such, we could support that as well. At UltraViolet, we have customers like that we're leveraging SentinelOne's cloud environment to do for. Also, a question came up here, coming back to the vigilance question, right? So as far as onboarding from vigilance, so what you think about with UltraViolet is a SOC, Security Operations Center. So not just the endpoint data or EDR data, but pivoting across other sources of data beyond infrastructure, such as application or cloud. And now, again, the power of AI SIEM, there's many sources that can be collected. And we use AI SIEM to collect those sources. And oftentimes, especially with enterprise customers, which we've learned from our migrations that I mentioned earlier, there's custom stuff like Oracle-related logs that we need to write custom parsing for. And you may have some level of ingest of logs and fields that aren't part of the standard build. And that takes some customization. UltraViolet does those for our customers on behalf of SentinelOne. And we work closely with their SentinelOne's product team to help further advance the roadmap of what we're seeing in the field. So you get that handshake between SentinelOne and UltraViolet for those different types of log sources as part of onboarding, whether it's vigilance or any other SIEM environment as we get into a deployment. I think we hit a bunch, but let's keep moving and then we'll answer more questions because some of them will come up naturally as part of the next stage here. So I think I hit push. There we go. So part 2 of 4 is log shipping, parsing, prep, right? So what we've learned along the way here is the importance of parsing, right? And regardless of the collector, marketplace collector or not, so oftentimes customers are using log parameters and fields that may be proprietary or may be custom to their deployment. And so it's important to parse on the ingest and not, don't defer it to later, right? And that's part of our process of how we avoid building up more and more technical debt as part of the deployment. So we take that into account in our deployment strategy around logging. The dual ship I already mentioned is also really important because you want to spot those discrepancies. And that will, if you don't do this, then you'll feel the pain that we did sometimes in some of these engagements where we try to write a panel or a rule and didn't have the data, right? And the reason why we didn't have the data because we didn't do a ship, we didn't look for the discrepancies. We assumed a Palo Alto log is a Palo Alto log, and oftentimes there's customizations to it, and we need to account for those as part of the log shipping process. And so you see up top 1 to 6 months. It really depends on the size of the migration. And, the ones we're dealing with are large enterprise customers that have, multiple terabytes of data. And so therefore, you have to do them carefully and methodically. You could stagger them, which we tend to do to help accelerate the timeline. And oftentimes that's the best way forward. But nothing is a substitute for not mapping the fields right? You got to do that as a key part of what you do with the log parsing and prep it. And at this point, I mean, Nate, wouldn't this be a good point to start to pull in some of the funky tools that you've created and SentinelOne is now starting to bring to market for us?
Yeah, there's a number of, so first off, there's an open source there's an open source repo, and I'll put it or we'll get it put down here so that everybody can see that. There's an open source repo that has all of our parsers in it. It has a number of dashboards, and so I'll make sure that that gets put into the components here. And there's a webinar that's happening later on this month on that. And so parsing is super important for a couple reasons. Atif, you hit them so well, and I'm going to double tap on just a couple of them. The first one is that that you have to have a known structure for your data if you want to correlate. So that's just a requirement, right? And you can do that in a number of ways. We tend to do that with graph a little bit, right? So you have your edges and you have your objects, and we can see how those connect. Like IP is a great example. So source IP, host IP, all of those kind of represent one thing. And so you can start seeing how we're putting those together. With that being said, parsing at SentinelOne is based off of OCSF. And the reason for that is because our detections, and somebody asked about that, there's about 1,600 right now. It keeps going up every week, and I'll get into why. But this is really that place where understanding and doing conversion of those existing pieces become paramount. So you need to have the data set in the right way in order for you to have a detection that will work. And so making sure that those two pieces are fundamentally important at this point in time so that you can do that testing as an organization for those critical alerts or those critical incidents that you really need to fix. So again, all of these things are a layer, and then you have to build on that layer for the next thing. And this one really is parsing helps detections. And so that's the kind of message here. And so if we have 1,600 detections that are wanting OCSF data, then we also want to have all of our parsers in OCSF format so that we can register those detections. And hopefully that kind of helps with this. But again, same idea here. We have those conversion tools, right, that Atif mentioned, that we've built. And one of those is effectively taking your Splunk searches or your QRadar searches and converting those into Power Query with the right either OCSF mention of data, fields, or using your own fields, because obviously there's going to be some custom details. And so we'll need to replicate those. But this makes it easier. Again, I've gone through a number of these. And when I came to SentinelOne, my number one thing was to make it easier for you as our customers and for Atif's team as our professional services customer to do this easy and not make it a 6 month of a lot of meetings, but make it automated, make it a pleasant and pleasurable experience in the worst kind of, situation, but at least give you some tools that make it easier for this, because it's a lot of hand jamming if you don't have some automation in there. So I'll pause there. Does that help?
That totally helps, and the hand jamming is what we felt, right? And I mean, we've been a partner to SentinelOne since the beginning, right? We've been on AI SIEM for over 2 years, and with that, when I first learned about this, the converters from taking a Splunk query to a Power Query, it's something that would have taken us hours, minutes, right? And it's just a matter of tweaking a couple of variables, keeping a couple of fields versus rewriting the whole thing, getting sample data, testing it, trying it again, and going back and forth methodically to get it to work, right? And so those more and more of that's coming. SentinelOne continues to invest in deployment tools, and as a top partner of SentinelOne, particularly for services, we are seeing the advantage of that as we continue to do these deployments. So moving along at 3 out of 4, and we're with time. I think we're doing good with time, Nate. We're just moving along.
I think we're doing perfect.
To the meat of the meat, right? The content. It's all about the content. You got the hamburger, you got the meat, you got the key part of what we're doing here is the content. And content migration, wow. I mean, when we first started off content migration, I have some numbers I'm going to pull up. We were looking at dashboards and panels taking an hour and a half to 3 hours, a search query or alert or report taking, it's about the same amount of time. Data onsourcing, data source onboarding, bringing them in could take multiple days, if not a day or less. Now with tooling and in innovation and how we're doing it, especially now with Observio, all of this is just moving so much faster. And I think, I would conjecture that if we redid some of these projects that we already have deployed with the new tools and the enhancements that we've brought in, we could really accelerate a deployment much, much, much faster, even with the most complex custom customer that we already have experienced. And so I want to highlight the content migration piece as, first off, the time it takes, because you got to get the content right. You got to get the report right, because there's a business decision to be made off of that report and after that, off of that panel. And so getting that oftentimes, like as I mentioned, I alluded here, initially it was hard. And it was harder, not just, for us, we're a cybersecurity company, we're focused on cybersecurity use cases, but SIEMs are bigger than that, right? They're pulling data, like for example, like with Splunk, in IT use cases and business use cases. And oftentimes those are the panels and dashboards and widgets that are being migrated. So understanding that context of like why the search logic is the way it is something really important. And this also takes into some of the application capabilities, and we're seeing that as part of the content migration story. So back to earlier on in the presentation, we talked about prioritization. And yes, we want to get all the content, but we want to get it prioritized. And what we found with customers is that they may have started off with, say, 500. And then once you prioritize them, maybe 150 of them are critical. And then by the time you're done doing the 150, could be very quickly, especially given the tools that we have, the customer realizes that, actually, I don't really need all 500. I only need about 300 of those, but I actually thought about all these other ones, back to the initial successful outcomes, that I actually want to do instead. And that is valuable, right? Because we're creating more value and not just taking what we had before and putting it into something else, right? And, Nate, from content migration, I know you've been very close to this. This is near and dear to your heart as well. I want to give you a moment to highlight some of this, highlight something that's important to you as well.
Yeah, I think from customers, I think you hit the nail on the head, the prioritization of this, and then the intent of learning how to fish. During any migration, there's so many things that customers are thwarted with, right? Whether it be changing technologies, adjusting network configs, all of those things. I think the one thing, as you kind of slow that down and as you get into content migration and development, right, it's a wonderful opportunity for two things. The first one is to understand what no longer serves you as details, right? I think Atif, me and you have done this with our teams multiple times. I can think of just a couple weeks ago when we were working with that ginormous retail company, and they were like, hey, these 50 searches don't work. The reason for it is there's not been any data for those 50 searches for like a year.
Yeah. They're not going to work.
They still had them, but these are the opportunities where it's just a good opportunity to do a little bit of light house cleaning, do that evergreen process that we consistently talk about in security, right? To make sure that you're focused on the things that matter most to you and that you're removing those things that no longer serve you. So that's the first part about content migration. Is it's a wonderful opportunity for a little bit of spring cleaning. The second part of this is, again, kind of going back to that front-focused area of what is our foundation? Our foundation in doing any of these, right, is to really protect our organization and protect those business partners that we have in our organization. And so making sure that we're aligned with what is most important to them, understanding our crown jewels. Where are they at? How do we protect those? Making sure that your migration and content aligns with what your new crown jewels are, because the last time you purchased a SIEM, that might be different. You might have been on-prem versus now you're in the cloud. So those are very different perspectives, and content migration allows for this. Now, in the weeds, it's a conversation and collaboration between our teams and your teams, to be honest, right? We have some expertise, but one thing that we are very diligent about, I know Atif and his team are very diligent about, is that concept of teaching how to fish. So in the content migration component, right, this is really where our teams get to come together and embrace learning from one another. Our teams learn something new every single day. We have a new parser that we find, a new pipeline that we're going to build because of you as our customers are providing us such a wealth of new information, new detection rules, all of those. Like our MDR team does all of our detection rules, and they base it off of what they see as zero-day threats in what they're doing. And so this content is the same opportunity for you and your teams to really harness the intelligence that your teams have, as well as just making sure that things are working to the best. Because then the next time you do this, it's so much easier, right? It's so much easier to do a tabletop exercise. It's so much easier to do evergreen processing when you know that you've cleaned at the content migration point. So I'll stop there, but those are my big things that I talk to customers about.
Thanks, Nate. And, I wanted to highlight also the training piece, because you may be looking at this slide and saying, hey, talking about training. Yeah, we do training at the end. No, actually do it the whole time. And the reason, the one anecdote for you is we started the training process early, and the customer was hesitant to that because they were like, well, you just do the PS project and then we'll do it at the end. But we suggested and we asked to just sit in on a couple. And what we learned is, number one, it's so easy to use, the Power Query language, the way that the widgets are being built and the dashboards can be popped in. That part was fine. But what we found out was the customer was able to give us the business context, and our ability to tweak the rules and adjust the intervals that the query runs, the type of polling that it's doing, those things we have no idea, right? We don't know the data like the business owners do. However, working in conjunction, it just really accelerated our process, and it taught us also to ask better questions, because now we understand the context of why those queries were even built to begin with. So yeah, I recommend another lesson learned along the way is embed training throughout the deployment. So that way you get more input from the actual stakeholders that are using the system versus all at the end. All right, we're coming
really good point.
Close to the end here. I wanted to jump to step 4 out of 4 around him, and there we go, publish. Validation, decommissioning. Shut it off right away. Well, we've done this in several ways. Typically, more of a phased decommissioning. But the validation decommissioning phase is when we are effectively out of license, right? We'll drive the legacy SIEM to run in parallel until the license ends, and then our new SIEM takes over. The UAT process should start our user acceptance test process should start way before the end of the decommissioning. Because back to some of the points made earlier, the reports and the outputs may need to be adjusted, and the end customer, the end user of those outputs may not know that until they actually see it, right? And so having them built, having them go through the panels. In fact, we operated with our retail customer. We operated in a way where we did a checkbox scoring of all the panels that were content that was migrated, having a one-by-one approval of each of them as part of our user acceptance process, so that we could make sure we define what good looks like, and it was actually what it should be, right? And so that was one of the key components around validation and cutover. Somebody brought up a question around, and thank you for the questions in the chat, around storage and how to move around storage. Nate, you may have some ideas on that as well, around the cold storage versus hot storage. I mentioned it all goes into hot because it's real time. However, it is. We do it at UV Cyber as well, where we have complementary types of AWS storage that we're using to keep. Like some of our customers that want 3 years of data. I don't know why they want. I know why. They have compliant requests. But what are you really going to do? The guys have hacked it. They've gone. They're taking there's nothing actionable that happened 2 years ago. Sorry, a little soapbox stuff there. But do I want to store 3 years of data hot, right? When I could store it at a fraction of the number longer term. But Nate, you may have something to say about that as well.
Yeah, Adrian, thanks for the question. I was just literally typing it out, and you grabbed it. So, Atif, that's wonderful. I think just for the audience, what's a strategy we employ to balance high volume, long term audit logs against low volume, high value alerting logs, right? When we think about this, there's both of them are equal citizens as far as I'm concerned as they're coming into the pipeline. The variance there is the decision as to when and where you want the data. So Observo is a great example of this, right? Taking that, now we have pipelines that you can do exactly what you're talking about. We can keep 30 days or 60 days of that high volume, long-term audit data in there. And right before that, right before it even gets into the data lake, we can position that off. It could go into Glacier if that's what you want, or into your own S3 bucket. It really doesn't matter. And then once the data comes into SentinelOne, now you have all of that ooey gooey goodness. The detections are sitting there, and none of this is in a different tier of storage. So that's the big difference is when we think about this, the tiering of the storage is all the same. We pay for, or as a customer, you pay for just how much you want to keep, and then how many times you want to go back and search for a really long time, like that 3-year time, right? Everything for your 30, 60, 90, generally that's covered. And so those long-term things, there's a number of places where we can make that decision, but none of them have to be in one place, which is really nice, because I know that was sometimes a struggle in other technologies, was having to understand how long you were going to keep data before you knew you were going to get rid of it. That's always a struggle. With ours, you get to decide those pieces, and then we can adjust fire as to what you need. Hopefully that answers the question, but it's not really a balance anymore. It's really just capabilities, and you get to decide as to when and where to do that. Does that answer the question, Adrian? Hopefully you give us a thumbs up.
We love thumbs up, and it's so cool that you guys are throwing out so many good questions here. We appreciate that, because again, that's why we're here, is to get you engaged, get you thinking about it. And of course, there's many demos we could do and to walk you through the architecture. But just wrapping up here, we're at the final stage of the 4-phase process. I'm just going to jump back a couple of slides. And we went through planning, parsing, content migration, and validation and cutover. And along the way, we try to highlight some of the key areas that we want to focus on in these deployments as we go about migrating a customer over to AI SIEM. And so, giving you a real world case study here, for a fintech customer, one of the ones I mentioned earlier, here are some of the specifics, right? So this was a 50 TB a day customer, massive, 50. So they're using it across the board, not just with security, but with the IT organization, their legacy SIEM. And then now we're moving it over to AI SIEM. And actually, I think we're like more than 75% done now with this process. It's been going on for some time. And, the outcomes really is that the cost efficiency was what's driving them the most for this one in particular. This fintech customer was trying to drive that down. The operational piece for the unified operations was a pleasant surprise, in that they didn't realize how much value they were going to get by getting multiple teams actually using logging in and running queries in their environment, and the collaboration that they're getting on the operations side. That was a hidden value that they didn't realize was such an important piece for their deployment. And so, of course, it improved detection and enterprise readiness, but really in a great place for the autonomous stock story. And now the next components are using hyperautomation, using the AI capabilities of the queries to continue to get value out of this deployment for this fintech customer. So coming towards the end here, Nate will wrap with this last point around just bringing it all together. Some closing thoughts. I have a couple, but maybe I'll introduce this, and then we can do our closing thoughts. So around picking the right partner, we've highlighted this along the way. Having someone with a track record. This is a little bit of a plug, but I'll just leave it at that. Having someone with a track record, using frameworks that are beyond just one proprietary way, like MITRE, is really important. on in evaluating what type of use cases to use, and then being committed to doing it in a timely fashion and doing it in a way that can go up and down, because oftentimes certain types of content needs to be migrated faster, and being able to be flexible for that's something that we've been working very closely with SentinelOne, and then having that back channel to their development team to give them the use cases we're seeing and the needs, particularly in the field for customers. So, and with that, I mean, Nate, I'll ask you the question. I mean, from a migration standpoint, give them one thing. Like, what's the one thing that you want? We said a lot of stuff here that you wanted to underscore as a key point to consider in their migration story.
I think you hit one, so I'll just double tap that one because I'm such a fan of UV Cyber. You need to pick a good partner. SentinelOne is a partner first and partner only, so we don't transact with customers directly. We leverage our partner ecosystem, and that provides us with a lot less of a push. But having a partner like UV Cyber for us is just as relevant for each customer. Just simply because you're there for the long haul. Like Atif and his teams are in each one of these large organizations, and they're staying there. They're working with them. They're providing SOC services for them. And so I think that's the biggest piece is to go with someone who their focus is your business. And in this case, the SIEM and SOC business is very much what Atif and his team do. As far as my own kind of what do I always really double tap with teams is the teaching to fish. During any of these, make sure your teams are involved. Make sure that they are getting exactly what they are asking for. Both me, my teams, Atif and his teams really, really want to satisfy and make sure that you are protected and that your risks are mitigated. And so I think that's the one is making sure that you and your team are just as eager in that transition and in that activity. So that's my soapbox if it's relevant. So I think next we have some what next, and is that kind of where we're at? We got 3 minutes.
Yeah, we have the poll, I believe, and then what's next. Maybe we go back to the team to help us close out.
Yeah, sounds great.
There it is. Okay.
Yeah, so we have a quick poll on the screen that is just asking about next steps so that our team can make sure to tailor make the next session that we have with you. And so you can go ahead and fill it out on your screen. A couple of steps here that's asking, you're ready to go, ready to migrate, you can hit that first one, the get started, and we'll reach out to you on that. And then the second is just, learning more, get an evaluation scheduled, and then still not sure, there's that option there to schedule and join a workshop. So if you want to fill that out really quickly, then we'll close out. We'll leave this on the screen. I see a lot of people still answering.
And definitely appreciate everybody answering. I know we saw some of the things in the Q&A that folks wanted to talk to their reps or get further information. This is the exact way to do that. It'll be automated and someone can help you. But also wanted to give a big shout out and thank you to Kathleen and Madison, who you didn't get to see behind here. But they are the ones that make this happen. So big thank you to those two for making all of this happen for us. We got to walk in and have a conversation. They had done all the hard work. So thank you, ladies, for making this easy for us.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Amazing work. And I really thank Nate for having me and supporting this conversation. Really appreciate it. And we'll see you in the field. We'll continue to rock away here.
Thank you, Atif.
Love it.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Definitely.